I wanted to have Bix on because so much stuff is going on right now, Bix. We were just saying it's almost impossible to keep up with everything that's going on as we enter into the last month and a half here until the end of the Jubilee year, and it seems like everything is on the brink right now. It appears that way to me. What's your take on what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, it's clear things are turning out the way we've been saying for years and years. I remember I first started with GATA back in, it was about 2000, and thinking, we're going to figure this out quick, and, I'll run out of things to write about. And no way. There's so much going on. There's no time to even, I blow off things I would have made a major big deal about because they're not as important. Once you understand that the markets are rigged and there's a fight between the good guys and the bad guys, and they're trying to destroy our liberty and our freedom. Once you understand all that, it's kind of like, okay, what's new? And there's just so much new and so many signs that the end is near for the regime of the bad guys, I think. Or they might win. These battles are heating up so much. It all depends on what happens after the collapse and after the monetary crash. Do we turn to the bad guys, the guys who control us now, or do we stand up on our own finally and say, hey, we can take care of ourselves?
Yeah, we can definitely take care of ourselves better than they've been taking care of us. That's for sure.
That's a fact.
Yeah, it's been interesting lately with George Soros. He got essentially started shorting the markets and got long into gold. And then one of his friends, who's a billionaire as well, came out just recently and said he's going all into gold. And then even the head man himself, one of the top financial elites, the super elites, Jacob Rothschild, came out just recently and said he's getting out of markets and currencies and going into gold. All in the last couple months. That's very interesting, isn't it?
I'd say it's interesting. I mean, if you're a GATA guy, that should scare you to death. When the bad guys come in and say, buy gold, it may be a clue that they might slam it again. But the gold and silver markets are under computer market control, and they have been since the 70s. So what they say and what they do doesn't really matter. What matters is we need to end the electronic games that go on in the COMEX and the LBMA, and we really need to start a physical gold and silver market, a real gold and silver market, not an electronic game, because they use the electronic games to manipulate the currencies, to manipulate the value, the perceived value of all fiat money. And one day we won't have this kind of situation, but it's not going to be today, and they can place the price of gold and silver at, $1 an ounce or $1 million an ounce with a click of a mouse. So I don't really watch the price of gold and the price of silver. I think an interesting thing that's coming up is when people figure out that, hey, this game really was rigged all along, and they start getting out of the electronic markets and into the physical stuff. That should be really interesting, because, especially in silver, because all the manufacturers have to get enough silver in their warehouses to make their product, at least for a few years, if there's going to be a silver shortage. And they have a lot of buying power. So, yeah, it'll be really interesting kind of how the silver market manipulation and the gold market manipulation shakes out in the end.
Yeah, one of the things I've said is, as this crash continues and comes to its final conclusion, which I expect to happen fairly soon, if not this year, then definitely in the next couple of years, that it'll be harder and harder to actually buy physical precious metals. And it was even just last summer here in Mexico, which is the largest producer of silver in the world, I couldn't find any silver coins to be bought at any of the normal places, including banks and the mint and normal currency exchange shops and places like that. I couldn't find any. I even contacted a neighbor here, Hugo Salinas Price, who's a multi-billionaire here, and he actually runs Azteca Bank, which normally has quite a bit of silver on hand, and he said, no, we can't get any either. And that was last summer. You can only imagine, as this progresses, how hard it'll be to actually get your hands on physical metal.
It is amazing, and it's an amazing story. And we've been talking about it and writing about it and speaking at the Silver Summit about it back when they used to, they don't invite me anymore. So I think I talked too much about conspiracies, and they didn't like that. But yeah, the silver story is an unbelievable one. And the final conclusion, the thing we've all been waiting for, is the end of the manipulation and a free market in silver. But that will mean there will be no physical. You could walk in with $1,000 into a coin shop, and they won't even sell you theirs. They're going to be scrambling just to hang on for their own survival. So yeah, it really will be kind of a point in time. It's not going to gradually go away. It's going to be kind of an automatic stopping of the availability of silver especially, but also gold, but mainly silver because there's so little of it left.
Yeah, are you expecting any sort of massive craziness or chaos to occur? I know that Barack Obama came out a few months ago and started to warn Americans to get prepared for disasters. And then just this week, the German government came out and for the first time since 1989 warned German citizens that they should start to stockpile food and other supplies. Are you thinking that something massive might be coming?
Oh, there's no doubt, and there's signs everywhere. You know, when the governments, even the governments are warning their people, and usually governments don't care about their people. They don't take care of their people. But yeah, the German government, they either came out or they're coming out very soon with a suggestion because of terrorism and the potential for calamity coming up. You should get 2 weeks of food and water. I would say you need 2 months, maybe 6 months of food and water. That's why I'm talking to you from my greenhouse right now. I think it's extremely important, especially to supplement your dried food. If you've been living in this crazy mixed up world and understanding the financial markets and the ability for the just-in-time delivery system to collapse at any moment, you've probably made some preparations, bought some dried food or stored up on rice and beans and things like that, which is great. That's what you need to do, but you also need to get your vegetables. And those are, you can't really, if the store's shut down, you're not going to be able to get your vegetables except for what you can grow yourself. And it's really easy to buy a little greenhouse like I'm sitting in right here and grow your own vegetables and get some sprouts. That's probably the most nutritious and easiest way to do it is grow your own sprouts. They take like 2 or 3 days to grow. And that will supplement your dried food stocks. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to get to the store as soon as you can because even the governments are coming and telling their people you need to stock up on food and water because the monetary hiccup that's coming, they're going to call it a hiccup, but this is the first time in the history of humanity that a global fiat reserve currency is going to collapse, which is the U.S. dollar, and all fiat money will go once the dollar collapses. Or just the markets freeze up. That's the other thing. People are saying, well, no, it'll just turn into hyperinflation. Well, that's as long as the markets are still up and running. If you have a banking collapse, like say Deutsche Bank goes down, which we're all kind of on death watch for them, you probably won't have that kind of hyperinflation. You're going to have a cessation of markets, just the ending of trading, because no one will have any money. All these large banks are interconnected, and then we're going to have to move forward the best we can.
Yeah, it's interesting that the day before the end of the Jubilee year, they're putting the Chinese yuan into the IMF's SDR basket on October 1st, which is also a weekend, which is also when they usually, if they're going to do some sort of major bank event, it's usually on a weekend. So that's very interesting. And I remember in 2008, during the financial crisis, most of the shipments of food and other things around the world actually stopped for 1 to 2 days. And it was because many people didn't know, because most of the shipping containers and things like that, they work on bank credit. So they get a credit from the bank that says when you get your tanker to California or wherever you're going, you'll get paid by the bank. But many shippers stopped shipping because they didn't know which banks were still alive. And that was in 2008 when things were much better than they are today in terms of debt and how crazy everything has gone. The U.S. government has doubled its debt since 2008. That is absolutely insane, and no one seems to know about it. No one seems to care. So I think it is really wise to start getting prepared. And I actually wrote that in our newsletter at the Dollar Vigilante. For people, if you want to subscribe, just go to dollarvigilante.com/subscribe. I just wrote a few months ago that I didn't prep this whole entire time until a few months ago. I'm starting to see the signs that we're getting close now. For sure. And I'm not the kind of person who, I don't worry, and I never worry about anything. I just live in the moment, essentially. And, you can't change these things anyway, so why worry? So I never really planned for anything. I also find that planning a lot for things never works out. It never is going to be what you thought it was going to be anyway. So I just don't worry about it too much. But in the last few months, I've started to get definitely some food supplies, some water supplies, and other things that I could need during a period of the markets closing, shipments stopping, banks closing, things like that.
It's funny because I would say I'm exactly the opposite. I started prepping literally over 10 years ago. Some of the food that I bought, the dried food that had a 10 to 15 year shelf life, is starting to expire. That's how sad that is. But yeah, you're right. And preppers usually think they have everything under control, and then the closer you get to the event that you're waiting for, you even get more and more and more, and you turn into like a hoarder sitting there with all your dried food in the garage. And then you find out, oh my God, I have to go mobile. I can't stay in the place I'm going to be. The universe has said, well, it's not going to work out like the way you planned, and so they have to leave all their gold, silver, and dried food at their house, which is being taken over by marauders. So yeah, you're right. I mean, for me, I sleep better, I think, because I've been prepping for so long and I've been ready for this for a long time. But it has changed also. I mean, with the cryptocurrencies and the ability for those to be a whole lot more mobile than gold and silver, I think that's really important. And it wasn't as important, obviously before 2009, it wasn't important at all because there was no such thing as, a reliable cryptocurrency before Bitcoin came out. So yeah, now it's like, well, okay, I'm going to sell some gold and silver and buy some cryptocurrencies because of the mobility factor. And that's probably as mobile as you can get. You can go from border to border, country to country, and as long as you have access to your private address and your public address, you can kind of reattach with your wealth anywhere in the world. And that's, guys like you helped me figure that out back when I was kind of a doubter because I was such a hardcore gold and silver guy. I'm like, oh, it's not physical, it's electronic. And it was my stupidity, and it cost me, obviously, because people were coming to me when it was like $8 and saying, hey, Bix, you got to look into this. And I said, no. But over time, you get smarter, and you find out that, hey, when you get stuck in a certain opinion, thinking a certain way, it limits you. You got to open your mind to what else is out there and what the potentials are. I still love gold and silver. Physical gold and silver in your own possession is a great, if not the best, store of wealth that will ever be. But there's more things out there, and you really have to branch out. And I've changed over the last 6 or 7 years to the cryptos, to being the biggest hater to the biggest lover, not the biggest, one of the biggest lovers. So yeah, it's a crazy time, and I should just follow your advice and be fly by the moment kind of guy. Moment to moment, you never know where you're going to end up.
Yeah, we'll see how that works out for me, and we'll see how it works out for you. But in general, that's just how I am. It's just my personality type that I don't over-plan or for example, for 7 years, I never planned more than a few minutes ahead. I'd show up at airports many times and just say, what's your next flight? And I'd go there. A few times I'd get to a country. I wouldn't even know what country it was. I'd never heard of it. Have to figure out what's going on. So that's I'm a little different that way. I'm just very that way. But it's a good point on cryptocurrencies you brought up, and it's actually a sign of a very wise person that you are, because many people will get locked into a mindset. And for example, so many people, if just us talking about Bitcoin right now, there'll be comments on YouTube down below. Oh, screw that! It's it's just gold or silver. That's it. And that's sort of the mindset that you were in before. But the fact that you could be open-minded enough to look into it more, and actually now you're at the point where, this is definitely another option in addition to gold and silver, for especially as you pointed out for transportation, the ability to just transfer or have it somewhere. For example, you can store $1 billion of Bitcoin in your own brain just by memorizing your passphrase. That has never been done before. Now, of course, everyone's got all their things, and these are very valid concerns. What if they turn off the internet? In fact, this is interesting. On October 1st, again, the internet, what's called the ICANN, which is essentially the control over the internet, essentially, is being transferred from the U.S. to the UN on October 1st. Very interesting. That's going to be a very interesting couple of days there in October, I think. But the people say, well, we have to turn off the internet, which they do. They've talked about the internet kill switch many times. The elites are starting to realize that we're getting way too much information, and it's not making it so their plans aren't working out so good anymore. So they talk about that, and they also say, what if the power goes out, which is also totally possible. The U.S. is the power grid is just an absolute disaster. It hasn't been upgraded in decades. But there can be things like EMP attacks, which have been talked about. In fact, numerous U.S. senators and governors have talked talked about the likelihood of an EMP attack, and they're usually talking about that because they're kind of planning it. A lot of these things are false flag attacks. So that is a valid concern. Sure, the power in the internet could go out. So yeah, you definitely should be diversified. But I think, as you said, that cryptocurrencies are definitely another tool to be able to salvage some of your wealth if the whole system comes crashing down.
Yeah, and I get that a lot. What if the internet goes off and it's just electronic and things like that? Well, if the internet goes off, there's been studies done that over 95% of the Western population would be dead in a matter of months because we rely on the internet for almost everything now with the just-in-time delivery system. There'll be no food, there'll be no gas, there'll be no water, there'll be no power. If the internet goes down for more than a couple of weeks, we're talking Mad Max world, and your gold and silver is not going to do much for you in that kind of world either. So, but then if people are saying, well, what if the internet goes down for like a month? Well, if it comes back up, nothing has changed with Bitcoin. It's still the exact same thing as it was before with the exact same things going on that it was doing, verifying every transaction, and you can get access to your place on the blockchain. So, yeah, the internet can go down. The EMP thing with a sun flare or a nuclear bomb set off in the atmosphere, that's a possibility. It's been a possibility. We've known about it since the 1930s. But the other thing is an EMP, unless it's 50 or 100 nuclear bombs going off around the world, the internet's still going to be going on. The internet is global. Also, with a sun flare, people talk about sun flares. Well, a sun flare will probably hit just half of the world because only half of the Earth will be facing the sun. So that half will be fried, yes, with a big enough sun flare, and it would cause a lot of problems. But the other half of the Earth that wasn't facing the sun would probably still go on using Bitcoin and electronics. So it is, but in those situations, where the internet goes down or where there's a sun flare that takes out half the population, there's worse. Gold and silver will probably be very worthless if you can't have food, water, and shelter and a place to protect yourself. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's always my answer.
Yeah. No, I have the exact same answer when people say that. They say, what if the power goes out for like years and then what's going to happen to Bitcoin? I'm like, you won't care what happens to Bitcoin. You won't even care about your gold and silver. You'll be hopefully still alive.
You won't be around.
You'll be hopefully still alive. Hopefully you've got all your guns and you'll be holed up trying to fight off anyone who's trying to get to the food that you smartly stored up. And no one will care about any of that for a long period of time until everything settles down. So yeah, these are sort of like out of the really extreme examples that people say, well, that's why Bitcoin, forget about it. But I think there's reasons to also look at gold and silver and say, hey, the governments might shut that down in many ways. Look at the U.S. They confiscated gold in 1933 for 4 decades. No Americans could even hold gold for that period of time. They might not do that again, but they might put a tax on it of 90% on any sale. They've got so many things locked down now. Of course, there'd be a black market for it, which is good, the free market. But there's risks to everything. And so people just need to realize that. But the thing is that most people out there, like probably no one watching this podcast, but your average person who's watching CNN right now, they have no idea that anything quite bad might happen. So they are not going to be prepared.
That's true. And with gold and silver, all it takes is finding a big gold miner going in there and, oh my God, I found the largest deposit of gold in the world. It's 50 times higher, bigger than anything we've ever known. That thing can happen too if you're invested in gold. And I have quite a bit of proof of gold mines that have been found in the United States that are the largest gold mines in the world that they've put into military bases and national parks. And Dianne Feinstein she's notorious for hiding all our natural resources in California. And I think that they're doing it all because they know the electronic monetary system, the fiat monetary system is going to collapse, and they want to be prepared. That's why we use everybody else's resources first, give them these pieces of paper we call the U.S. dollar, and then when it crashes, we'll be able to go back and nobody will trade with us because we've done this all these years. I'm surprised they trade with us today, but hey. But yeah, and there's been a long-term plan on how to deal with this transition because it's huge. And everybody knows about it in the higher levels of government. It's not like, Hugo Chavez didn't know gold was the most important thing monetarily in the world. He even, he would, didn't he talk about gold at the UN and he would hold up bars of gold just like Putin holds up bars of gold. They know exactly what's going on. The Chinese central bank was a GATA member for years, and they subscribe to my channel. I'm sure they monitor your channel as well. They know exactly what's going on, and they will play the game with everybody else until the end. And China has been planning for this for a long time too. That's all those ghost cities you hear about in China that they built. Gigantic cities, just beautiful cities, like there's a mini Paris that nobody lives in. When the crash happens and it all falls apart, they're going to have all that infrastructure built for their people, and they're going to start again, just like we will. So yeah, it's it's a crazy time. It's a crazy thing that's going to happen, but there's a lot of things in play when this transition happens, and it's been planned for a long time.
Yeah, and I know you have you've been following this, of course, for a long time as well. You have a very interesting take on it all that's different than anyone else's take I've ever heard. Why don't you maybe even just explain your take on it, just generally, for people who don't know anything about you, your kind of take on how there's some good guys, because I don't believe that there's many good guys in government or central banks, but you think there is. So why don't you give your take on it? I find it quite interesting.
Sure. I started all this with GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and fighting against the banksters. Back then we thought it was just the banks rigging the gold and silver markets. And then, and the more research we did, and I was just digging into everything I could, we found out that the U.S. government was involved, and the Federal Reserve System, and the governments of many nations in England and in Europe. And we found out, it's not just J.P. Morgan and HSBC and Goldman Sachs that are doing this. They're being controlled and given the green light to go ahead and do it to make money for themselves on the side, but mainly to control the value of the unbacked fiat system. You had to control the system using computers and derivatives from the very early days. And after I dug into the Federal Reserve archives, I found out a ton of information on what was done in the early days of electronic money, which is the 60s and 70s, when they invented computers and they invented electronic assets. And it goes back to Alan Greenspan, of course. In 1987, he was put as head of the Fed. That's when most people kind of heard of him. And a lot of the finance guys are saying, "Oh my God, the largest gold bug in the world is going to head the Federal Reserve, the anti-gold." But Greenspan had been in charge of a lot of this stuff back from the 60s, when he invented some of the first computer programs on BASIC. BASIC is a computer programming language, one of the first shareable ones, invented by a guy named John Kimeny and his buddy Thomas Hertz, or something to that, Thomas something, Kurtz. And they invented this great computer program that can be shared by the world. And this is in the 1960s, and Alan Greenspan was one of those early adopters. And he turned the computer programming aspect of it towards the financial markets. And then from the 60s and 70s, he worked with Arthur Burns, who was the head of the Fed back then, to get into the markets, be able to control them with computer programs. Computers trading back and forth to each other to set the price of everything. That's why we were able to go off a gold standard. And they put Greenspan in charge of all this stuff. And I've proven it many times. It's actually in Alan Greenspan's book that he's the guy who screwed up the Y2K problem. It was his programming, putting 2 digits instead of 4. And then that's why he was put in charge of the Fed. And the idea was, it's all based off an economic theory called On the Road to the Golden Age, which was written in the 1960s, Nobel Prize-winning theory. And the theory was the way to get back to a true gold standard, the best way to do it and the most profitable way, would be to run the system as long and hard as you can, printing as much money as you can, build out your infrastructure, build out your military, take all constraints off money printing, which we know they have since the 70s and 80s, and then completely get so out of hand that the bubble blows by itself. And that's what Alan Greenspan's job was to do. When he got into the Fed, he used his computer programs to instigate the 1987 market crash. If you look at every single stock market crash since then, they've all been computer controlled and computer generated. And it is an amazing thing. And then, so when Greenspan got into office, into the Fed, he basically took away all the constraints, fighting against any regulation at all on derivatives, because he knew derivatives would blow the system sky high and take out the banks. And when that got finished and done, the United States, the largest debtor nation in the world, could go back to our constitutional forms of money of gold and silver. So all this stuff, I kind of developed this theory, and I wasn't making it up. I was doing it off Greenspan's writings and what he said in the past, and then while he was at the Fed, and then what he said almost months after he got out, he was talking about going back onto a gold standard. So it's all built up, and that's why
Yep.
Yellen, everybody's doing the same thing. They're printing as much money as possible to crash the system. And I think it will only be after the system crashes that I'm either proven right or wrong, but there's a lot of information that I present that to me proves flat out that that's what's going on.
Well, it's actually fascinating to me that you've taken up this sort of angle on it, because I've taken a similar angle in that it's pretty obvious they're trying to destroy the system. Whenever that's what's funny about most of the financial analysts and stuff out there. They just look at what's going on. They're like, well, this seems crazy, but I guess the Fed knows what they're doing or whatever. It's like, no, they're trying to destroy the system. It's just obvious. Like every single thing, the U.S. government going into double the amount of debt now. They're just printing money everywhere as fast as they can. But my take is these are really evil people who want to destroy it and then put in their whole one world government thing. What you're saying is,
also, yeah.
That's also true. Okay.
Well, there's two factions. I call them the good guys and the bad guys.
Oh, okay.
The good guys, the bad guys, yeah, they want to destroy the system mainly to hide their bad deeds over the last 100 years, but also to institute a one world government with the IMF and all that, the special drawing rights coming in and China bringing in them, and that's all about the bad guys. That's what they want to do. They want, when the crash happens, they want the people to turn back to them, say, oh, fix this problem that we created because we took out mortgages or we spent too much money. But the good guys are on the same track. They want to crash the system because they want to take out the bad guys. And so it's going to come down to Congress. And just like it did in 2008 when Hank Paulson went in front of Congress and said, we need $700 billion to bail out the banks. The first go-around, he got denied by Congress. And stock market dropped like 50% and came back a couple weeks later with all these concessions. It's going to come to Congress again, but this time it won't be $700 billion. It'll be $25 trillion to bail out all the banks in the entire system. And I think now we've learned so much in the last 7-8 years. I think the people are ready to stand up and say, no, we're not going to bail you out again. And in that scenario, we can start fresh and kick the bad guys, the banksters, out. But it will be up to, at least in the United States, it will be up to us to say, are we going to keep these oligarchs and turn to their one world government solution? Or are we going to stand up and say no more of this insanity and go back to using gold and silver? And I think there's even going to be a Bitcoin component to it because I think the U.S., the CIA and the NSA was involved in the early days of Bitcoin, but they haven't really passed any laws in the U.S. to ban Bitcoin or really even slow it down.
That's
and
true. They just tried to regulate it a lot, but they haven't banned it.
Regulate it, right? And they did institute some regulations on manipulation of Bitcoin, making manipulation of Bitcoin illegal, which was really interesting because all you're doing is protecting Bitcoin when you're doing that. Now it might be under the dark cloak that they come in and say, well, we're going to pretend we're regulators, but we're going to be the ones rigging it type of thing. But yeah, I think the U.S. has Bitcoin as part of the plan of the new choices that they're going to offer to their people. And I think every government of every world will have the same option. You can use gold and silver. If you don't have any gold and silver, you can go back to paper money. It's fine if you trust your government, or use a different kind of commodity. Copper or metals have traditionally worked great, but why not use Bitcoin? I mean, if Greece had Bitcoin back when they collapsed, they wouldn't have to turn to the EU.
Absolutely.
They could have just said, okay, we're gonna give a tenth of a Satoshi to every single citizen and shut our doors. Venezuela could have done the same thing. They could be running off Bitcoin today. That's the amazing thing about that currency. So what will happen, I don't know, but I do think it is a fight between the good guys and bad guys, but the people in the end will get to choose the new situation we're going to walk into as far as using a currency.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't fully realize your full take on it. I think I have to read more of your stuff because I thought you were saying they're all good guys. I'm like, no, they're not. They can't know. I know that. I know a lot of these people are not good guys. God, no. Okay, that's very interesting. We're way more on the same page than I thought we were. I'm sorry I didn't fully look into all your work before, but I'm so busy I just can't look into everyone's stuff. But I'm definitely going to look more into it. And a lot of the information you have on Greenspan is very interesting. I noticed it as well. As soon as he got out, he said they should just shut down the Fed and go back to gold. I'm like, what? Well, why didn't he say that for the last 20 years? Yeah. And it's interesting, too, how you said that people are more ready than ever for this to change back because I don't know if you saw, but the Federal Reserve just went on Facebook. The Board of Governors.
I see that.
It was literally
destroyed in the comments. It was great.
Thousands and not one good comment. All just like, get out of here, you bunch of criminals.
Have they shut that down yet? Have they shut it down?
No, they still haven't. I'm sure it'll be any day now. Obviously, that's how slow they are. Government bureaucrats. Well, they're not actually government, but related to the government bureaucratic types that take them a few days to realize what's going on. But no, like if you look back to 2008 when the last crisis was, most people didn't even know what the Federal Reserve was. It wasn't until really Ron Paul started talking about it. And then since then, there's been a massive rise in sort of end the Fed movements and all sorts of things like that. People are aware that the central banking is what's causing most of the problems in the world today. So it is really interesting. It's going to be interesting. Do you have any predictions over the next couple of months about it, what you expect to happen?
Well, I mean, for the last couple of years, I've been saying this is kind of the time frame of the big collapse. The collapse is ongoing. It's been ongoing since 2008, but they've been holding it up and rigging it. And the stock market is run off a computer program out of the basement of the U.S. Treasury. They have a trading floor in the basement of the U.S. Treasury and at the New York Fed. That's kind of where they have their bullion banks and their prime dealers that kind of run their book for them. Using the Exchange Stabilization Fund, it's completely legal in U.S. law to rig the markets, and it's part of the 1934 the Gold Act of 1934. That's the same act that outlawed, holding gold personally, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes in the U.S. about that. But yeah, my take is now we're in the hot spot right now, and you can see it all over. I mean, the stuff about Hillary Clinton and hacking George Soros and all this stuff would never happen unless somebody other than the bad guys were in charge. Because this has been going on. This bad stuff has been going on for 100 years, but the population wasn't allowed to know about it. Now it seems like everything, nobody can get away with anything anymore. Now nobody has gone to jail, mind you, but they will. I really think they will. And the wake-up moment, everybody's like, well, when can we say, the good guys won, or the system is done, or the fiat money is done? I think the wake-up moment will be the moment. It will be a single day that people go to their ATMs and can't get any money out. And that will be caused by the destruction of the derivative system. Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, they all know exactly what's going on. They're piling up the derivatives just so that the implosion is going to be bigger. If you look at Citibank, great example, when they were doing the Dodd-Frank Act, the very last thing ever put in the Dodd-Frank Act before it was signed into law was Citibank's writing. Citibank wrote down for the congressman, stick this in as a rider on the Dodd-Frank law that says that before the FDIC can pay out any of their insurance for checking accounts or savings accounts, they have to pay off derivatives first. So what did Citibank do? They put all their derivatives from this offshore entity, off balance sheet type of financing, all onto their balance sheet, so that if there is a collapse, the FDIC would have to bail out Citibank's derivatives before anything else. Now that's a really interesting concept because the derivatives we're talking, Citibank I think has 40 or 50 trillion in derivatives with a T, and the FDIC doesn't have any money. They would have to go to Congress. So Congress would have to stand up and say, okay, we're going to bail out everybody, but first we're going to mostly bail out the bank's derivative positions. It's not going to happen. There's no way. There would be a revolution overnight if the people didn't get their money first. And it's in the law now that they can't get their money first. So I do think there won't be a bailout. There won't be any kind of attempt at fixing it. The bad guys will attempt it, but it's not going to work because the people are done with. You were talking about all the new information. All the people came on because of Ron Paul and things like that. There's been movies. There's a ton of great movies out there about what happened in the collapse. This is going to be 50 times worse because we're not talking just mortgage debt or credit default swaps. We're talking national debt, the European national sovereignty debt that is imploding left and right. That's the stuff, and it's 50 times bigger, and pensions and 401ks, and it's all going, and yeah, it's going to be gigantic. But it had to be. At the end of the day, the only way to end this corrupt system is to blow it, set off the biggest neutron derivative bomb the world has ever known, and that's what's going to happen very soon. I think by I've been saying by September, the good guys want to blow, and then if it goes past the end of Shemitah and into November, and nothing much different has happened, I've heard from a couple of people that the bad guys want the very end of October, like the 28th or the 29th, to be the day that they collapse the system. Which is, so if we go through the September or October, and we get into late October, I think it is October, I think the 28th, right before the election, and the bad guys blow the system, you'll know that the good guys are not winning, and we're in a world of hurt, as they say.
Yeah, that's generally what I'm thinking as well. And isn't it interesting that the Jubilee year ends on October 2nd, and the Jubilee and the Shemitah are generally times of washing away of debt. And what you're talking about is this whole system could come crashing down, and all of these things essentially are washed away. And that could happen during the time of the Jubilee. It's almost amazing how this is all happening, isn't it?
It is, and whether it is written in the stars or a religious thing or caused by the people who believe in it getting out of the system, that's the other option. But the United States is ready for it, and we are the largest debtor nation in the world by far. Out of any country, we have more debt than any country in the world. So who wins when there's a debt default? Well, the United States would probably win on one aspect, but China everybody will be very mad at us, and that's things that cause wars is the bailing on paying off debt. Although no nation in the history of the world has ever paid off their debt, they either collapse or devalue their currency. I think this will be unique because computers are involved, and when the system shuts down, the computers will shut down as far as the monetary system, because everybody's a credit to somebody else, and when the credit goes, you're not going to be able to get your money out of the ATM, and that's what's going to wake people up finally. And I'm excited about it. As scary as it sounds, this is what we've been hoping for and praying for, that the electronic fiat money system and the corruption that it comes with gets taken out. It'll be scary, but it is something that needs to be done for humanity.
Yeah, I think about it similarly in that I've gone through a few crises in my life, and you always worry about these crises, and you worry about them, but when they happen, it actually is quite a healing sort of a thing afterwards, because first of all, you're not worried about it anymore. Secondly, you got through it, so you're kind of like it's almost like a weight got lifted off your back in some sense. So in some ways, like a lot of people say, oh, this crash, it's going to be terrible and horrible, and actually in many ways it will be for many people, especially for a short period of time, but in many ways it could be healthy. So many people are so lost out there now. They're being impoverished constantly. They can't keep up with the inflation rate. They're working 3 jobs. They're just struggling. In some ways, this could be like a boon to so many people as this system gets washed away and we can get back to a normal economy with normal real money, and everything is much more prosperous. There'll be much less war, probably no war, because you can't finance them without the inflation of the central banks. So in some ways, this is a really great thing, but we just have to get through the transitionary period, and that's why you're sitting in a greenhouse right now, and that's why I've started to stock up a little bit. But yeah, I agree with you that it could be a really excellent thing. It all really depends on exactly what you said, which way it goes afterwards. If we go into the one world government, one world central bank with governments and running everything and controlling every facet of everyone's lives in a worldwide taxation system, that will be even worse than what we have today. Or maybe we'll get rid of it all and go into a much more free market system, and then no one even has any idea how much prosperity and how much better the world would be if that was the case.
I agree 100%, but to get there, to our next free market system it has to be a real free market system, not the system we have today.
No.
You know, everybody's like, oh, capitalism's horrible. Well, the world has never even seen capitalism. Everything's been rigged from the very beginning, and it's rigged now. And part of this cleansing, it really is a cleansing of the system, and the debt jubilee, the whole Shemitah thing. It's a great term for it, because it's a cleansing of not only getting rid of the debt. Everybody needs to remember, one man's debt is another man's asset in this world that we live in. So yeah, all the debt will be gone. And you think about it, when countries say, okay, how do we move forward? If we don't want these bad guys leading our lives and the one world government, we're going to have to reallocate money to the citizens of our country. There's no more debt, so that's not going to be a problem. Like right now, that's the biggest problem around the world, is there's just too much debt. And people are spending their time and their energy paying these bankers who created money out of thin air. That's going away. So then all of a sudden all our schools are funded, and the good projects, as I say, are funded. But it really does, the biggest problem we're going to have if we kick these banksters out is, how do we allocate the new monetary system fairly to the people? And that, as far as Greenspan was concerned, and what the Fed wrote in the early Road to Ruta documents, their plan is to do it by Social Security balances, because this is just in the U.S., because they think, well, the people who've worked the hardest and the longest should get more of the resources, of the money, and the people who've just started to pay into it should get less. And that was their idea. But even in their documentation, they said, we don't know if that would work, because the people have to agree. And having a population of 7.5 billion or however many people we have, how are we going to get everybody to agree on what type of monetary system we're going to use going forward? And I think it'll come down to individual countries, if not individual communities, on what they use as money, if there's no agreement kind of right off the bat. But I really, in the United States, I think the people will be so mad, because I think there's also going to be truth bombs coming out. Truth bombs, like you're finding them out right now with the DNC and the convention and all that, and when Hillary's crimes come out. These truth bombs will be very enlightening, because the people who have been asleep for so long that we affectionately call the sheeple, God, I was lied to. I was lied to every day I woke up, every day I went to work to pay taxes at outrageous rates. I've been lied to ever since. And that's going to be a good time. And there's so many new technologies that will come out that, if we're told the truth, we've been able to make free energy since the 40s, and now why are we burning fossil fuels? They're not even fossil fuels, if you ask me.
No.
Anyway, don't want to go down that track. But yeah, and these truth bombs are coming out already, and imagine if all the truth bombs came out, and everybody knew why the government was doing why they were hiding so much from us monetarily, why they're hiding so much from us as far as the energy that we use. And free energy is a huge thing. That would change the world instantly.
That's why they got rid of Tesla.
Exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, you go back, and there's so many other people that have invented magnetic energy and all, pulling out the hydrogen from water.
Well, the first car invented was an electric car, and then Rockefeller and the boys took it all over, and it was just gone. And now it's coming back a little bit with Tesla, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, so many things. I actually have a funny story, Bix. I recently had my mom move in with us down here in Mexico. She wasn't doing very well, and she was in the Canadian socialized medical care system, which was killing her. So brought her down here, and now she has a full-time nurse in the house and eats good food and gets sun and everything. But sometimes she sees me watching YouTube videos at night, and she'd be rolling by in her wheelchair, and she'd watch a little bit. And after a few nights, she stopped, and she was watching one video I was watching about some sort of truth bomb, as you were mentioning. And she said, "Whoa, is that really all true?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." And she said, "There's so much truth coming out now." And she said, "I can't believe it. They lied to us our whole lives about all this stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?"
Imagine if all the lies were revealed and all the truths were told, and all of a sudden people woke up and they have no more debt, and we can move forward the way we want to. No more wars. I mean, people have been saying I'm way too optimistic. I tell them the whole system's going to crash, and they call me way too optimistic. It's always cracked me up. But I do think we have the ability to live completely different than what we're living now, and all it takes is the truth to come out. And that's what I've been fighting for. And all the truth, not, the thing about Greenspan that really pisses me off, I'm not, in his camp saying, he did this and it's a great thing that he did this. The thing that pisses me off is he had, in order to keep the system going, he had to lie about it every time he opened his mouth. And that is a problem. You can't build a great nation on a foundation of lies. And that's what every Western country has done. Even if they were lying for our own good, the lies have to end. And then we can move on as upstanding, responsible human beings.
Yeah, unfortunately, they've made so many people not that upstanding and responsible due to all their systems. And that, I think, it was part of their plan. So you see so many people in the U.S. now, they just have no clue how to even, so many people are so dependent on the government. They can't be productive. Okay. They go through 12 years of indoctrination camps in school, and they don't learn anything. Most of them come out, they can't even read. That's all on purpose. So that's going to be the real issue, is dealing with all the people who really aren't prepared to live in a free world, if it comes down to that. But I think we can get through it. We just have to get through it. And people like yourself put out this information. We put out our information. Just like you said, the truth can set people free. And I think even though it'll be a very hard time for some people for a few months, very quickly the free market, if allowed to function, capitalism, as you said, if it's allowed to function, you just look at cities like Hong Kong. In a few decades, it went from a fishing village to what it is today, which is just unbelievable. Look at Dubai, the same thing. Once you allow just for the market to operate, things can just be rebuilt incredibly quick. Just look at Germany and Japan after World War II, very quickly. And that wasn't, of course, totally free markets, but they unrestrained the market quite a bit, and it just booms, absolutely booms. So a lot of things to be optimistic about. And so I'm glad you brought all those up, because a lot of people always say about me, I'm a doom and gloomer. I'm really not. This is actually a good thing that needs to happen. And once it happens, hopefully we can move on to something much better.
I agree. And it's interesting because I've written 4 books now, and the first 3 were fairly upbeat, saying good guys are winning this battle. There's a chance that we could take them out and move to a different kind of system. And the 4th one was, well, when that happens, the majority of the population may die because they're not equipped. They're not ready to take care of themselves and to be on their own. And, is a transition to something completely open and honest right away, where a lot of people die, a good thing or a bad thing? My ultimate take was, people are dying anyway. They're dying. Do you want people to continue to die because of this system, or do you want them to take care of themselves? It's like pushing a baby bird out of the nest. It was the analogy I used. And it was the bald eagle, because I'm from the United States, and I use that analogy. It's like 80% of the bald eagles in the nests that fall out of the nest die. And it's incredible, but the ones that survive are strong and move forward and can handle the world. People are dying now because of the system that we're in. They're spraying our air with toxic chemicals. They're shoving our face with GMOs. That's killing people. And it's making them rich through the hospitals and healthcare and all that. And it needs to end. All that will end if we stand up and take care of ourselves. And the truth bombs come out, and we put these people in jail who did this to us. And that's what I'm looking forward to. The perp walks that go on. There'll be a lot of them.
I definitely wouldn't be sad watching Obama and Hillary Clinton and Henry Kissinger all walking along with chains and orange jumpsuits. It wouldn't be a sad day for me, that's for sure.
A lot of those guys probably wouldn't get the kind treatment of a fair trial. They'd probably be taken out, once these truth bombs are dropped and people know exactly what went on. There's going to be lynch mobs and all that. It's part of the transition. I mean, we're going to die anyway. At the end of the day, we're all going to die. And, the question is, are you going to live an honest life and a true life? And are you going to fight for what you believe in and the reason for you being here? What is the reason for us to be here? I think every individual has their own reason, and we're dealing with it right now. But I think it's a real exciting time. and we'll see what happens going forward. But as you said, everything's coming down to the kind of end of the Shemitah year and this year. I think if we don't see anything this year, it will mean that the good guys have lost and the bad guys are going to get their one world government that they've been, trying to institute for so long. And then we're screwed for good. I think this is our last chance.
Well, very interesting. I guess we should end it there. Very optimistic note and a very scary note at the same time. And that's where it's at. That's what I've been trying to say for a few years. We're headed towards the end, and it's going to go really good or really bad. It's up to each one of us to be aware of it and do our own part to try to make sure it goes the good way and not the bad way. And that's just going to take spreading this information. As Bix said, truth bombs and just spreading information is how we can really help to sway things so that it goes the right direction. So I'd like to thank you for coming on, Bix, and I also want to thank you for agreeing to speak at our upcoming Dollar Vigilante Internationalization and Investment Summit coming up on February 24th, 2017, right here in Acapulco, Mexico. And then
I tell you, my wife is very excited that I'm finally speaking at a place that has a beach.
Yeah, it's better than the Silver Summit in, I call it Spokompton, Idaho, or what? Spokompton, yeah. Washington, yeah. And in the dead of winter, too. That was, I try to do, if I'm going to have a conference, it's going to be on the beach in February. So, and then the day after that, Bix, just so you know, 4 days, four full days of Anarchapulco with tons of cryptocurrency stuff. And these guys are all changing the world, trying to create that world already ahead of time before it's too late, so that we can create a new world that, so when these systems can collapse and will collapse, and we can just move on after that. So I think you're going to have a good time.
I'm looking forward to that more than I'm looking forward to giving my speech.
It should be interesting. We have so many great Bitcoin guys. Roger Ver, the Bitcoin Jesus, Trace Mayer, he's been involved in Bitcoin since the earliest days. So it's going to be a great time. So I don't know if it'll be up officially on the Anarchapulco website by the time this video goes live, but just check out anarchapulco.com. If you don't see it there, check back in a few days. We're just about to announce it all. We're also going to have David Morgan of the Morgan Report, one of the great silver investors. We're also going to have Bill Murphy of GATA. I don't know if I even told you that, Bix. So I
heard that.
Yeah. So
just hanging out with Bill on the beach should be an interesting event in itself.
It's never boring hanging out with Bill, and many others, of course, our senior analyst, Ed Bugos, and many others. So check that out. And Bix, why don't you let people know where they can find more information on what you're doing?
Just go to roadtoruta.com. It's all on the website, but make sure you sign up for the email updates, because I tend to just do all email updates these days, and I've kind of left to the wayside the real long, drawn-out articles because it's happening so fast. And just roadtoruta.com. Come on by.
Cool. Great. Thanks for coming on. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, share down below. As I said, we need to spread this information so people know what's going on, so they're not sideswiped completely when this happens. And as Bix and I both think, it could happen incredibly soon. We're talking, he mentioned September, October, November. I think that time frame is very likely for something quite massive to happen. And as Bix mentioned, if it doesn't happen, it's going to get really bad after that. And then people need to be even more aware of what's going on so that they can survive and prosper.